DawsonBloomberg via GettyBoris Johnson is one of the few recognizable politician-shaving marched us all the way to the top of the hill with claims that this was going to be a game changer. It turned out to be a dull, almost pointless piece of political theater. But here's the thing, the vast majority of people aren't political obsessives. Most people are normal with normal lives, normal interests, and to be blunt, a normal sense of what actually matters in life. That means that the identity of the Secretary of State for shuffling bits of paper backwards and forwards and then throwing them in the bin is a matter of supreme indifference to almost everyone. Can you name even half a dozen cabinet ministers? Beyond Theresa, May and Boris, then possibly Amber Rudd and Philip Hammond, and that's pushing it. I doubt it very much. But it's those of us who can, not the vast majority who can't, who have the real problem, because politics isn't really about names and the Westminster Village games that people like me pay attention to. DawsonBloomberg via Getty. Yes, the McVeigh is a new addition to the cabinet. I'll argue to my dying day that politics is central to our lives and well-being, and that we must never take it and our democracy for granted. But the politics that matters is about real life. It's about schools, hospitals, welfare, crime, what we see around us every day. Whether it's David Gorky HES just been reshuffled to another job, or Esther McVeigh SHES just taken his job, who is in charge of the Department of Work and Pensions, certainly matters because different ministers have different priorities. But far more important is how those priorities are set by the government overall and what impact they have. That's why the brouhaha over Monday's botched reshuffle is in the end irrelevant. Because once you move down from the PM and the Chancellor, who really does set the agenda, it is politics, not individual politicians, that matter. What's vital now is that the government acts on the issues that really matter to people. Issues like the cost of living, affordable housing and quality of life. Issues like crime. Issues like the NHS crisis, and it's silly to pretend that postponing all non-urgent operations isn't a crisis. Issues as basic as regular and frequent bin collections. It's easy to say, as some Tories do, that Labour should be miles ahead in the polls given how dreadful the government has been at dealing with many of those issues. And so because the two parties are level pegging now, things are okay. But that portrays a terrible complacency. More realistically, Labour's level pegging, indeed a small lead in most polls, is an indictment of how the Tories have failed to get to grip with these issues. It should be almost inconceivable that a party in the hands of hard-left extremists who stand almost completely outside the norms of British politics should be within touching distance of power. And yet we have to be honest, that is where Jeremy Corbyn's Labour now is. If the extremist-run Labour Party, which poses a dire threat to parliamentary democracy itself, is to be kept out of power, the government must be relentlessly focused on politics in its real, most basic sense. Take housing. Baroness Thatcher knew that a property-owning democracy provided the greatest protection against socialism. She and successive governments acted on that. But home ownership is now at its lowest for 30 years, made worse by the failure to increase the number of available and affordable houses for rent as well as purchase. On Monday, the Department for Communities and Local Government was renamed the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. But if there aren't thoroughgoing reforms to promote more affordable housing, changes to our madly restrictive planning rules, for example, then the name change is the worst kind of superficial nonsense. Above all, the government needs to keep asking itself why people should vote Conservative, and across every area to shape policy to make that more likely. More broadly, there are lessons to be learned from history, such as former U.S. President Teddy Roosevelt, who saw that capitalism in the 1890s had warped out of shape. Jeff Overs, BBC News. Current affairs via Getty. Baroness Thatcher recognized a property-owning democracy was the best of every world. So-called robber barons and monopolies had turned capitalism from the greatest gift to working people to their enemy as consumers, workers, and small businessmen were steadily ripped off. He acted to save capitalism by dealing with such abuses. That is how many people feel now about the system, and the government must address those issues before the Lure of Corbyn takes too great a hold to break. It's not much to ask, framing policies that give ordinary, hard-working people the chance to own their own home, take home a reasonable wage, not have to worry about their health, and then be ready for their parents, and then their own old age. That's what the Conservatives have always done, and they must do it again. And they must start to behave as if they understand how they can come across. So instead of swatting away all objections to handing over £13 billion in aid as if somehow racist, think about how mad it seems when hospitals are sending decent, hard-working people home because they can't cope. The reshuffle might have grabbed the headlines, but it's the policies that matter.